I'm on my way to interview the Prime Minister here in Downing Street, and I really don't know what kind of state I'm going to find him in. He denies telling civil servants, and I quote, to just approve Mandelson's appointment.
No, I've known Morgan a very long time.
Labour is facing annihilation. Do you take personal responsibility for potentially thousands of councillors, Labour councillors, losing their seats?
Well, firstly, let me say what fantastic candidates we've got.
But if it's catastrophic, will you take personal responsibility?
Of course I take responsibility for everything this government does.
I think this is the J word, it's judgment, and that's what people are questioning. They're questioning his judgment.
He's not wily, he's not listening to the gossip, he's not interested in any of that.
And if your wife, Vic, turns to you and says, you know, enough's enough, this pressure is intolerable, would you listen to her?
I always listen to Vic.
Hello!
Hi.
Welcome to my very first show.
Hi,
Come and sit
lovely to be
down.
here.
It's great to see you both. We've got so much to
Good to
discuss.
see you.
We've got the interview with the Prime Minister, your friend. We've got the King arriving in the US, your friend.
Yes. Oh, good luck to him.
And so we'll discuss all of that. And we have the King of Satire, Armando Iannucci, arriving in the studio.
Well, he's got lots to play with and what's happening just now.
Exactly.
I'm
It's the
looking
thick of
forward
it.
to the PM interview.
Yeah. I want to hear everything you've got to say on it.
No,
It's quite revelatory.
I'm having flashbacks to the Boris Johnson scenario.
Much more from Helena and Penny later on in the show. But let's start with my interview with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. I'm on my way to interview the Prime Minister here in Downing Street, and I really don't know what kind of state I'm going to find him in, because increasingly his MPs are getting very disgruntled with him. Even members of the Cabinet aren't there for him. So I imagine it's pretty lonely there in number 10. And I'm wondering if this could even be one of the final interviews he does as Prime Minister. So let's find out. Prime Minister, you won a landslide nearly 2 years ago, promising, and I quote, to end the chaos, to restore service and respect to politics, to end the era of noisy performance and tread more lightly on people's lives. I just wondered what went wrong.
Well, what I'd say first in relation to that is that just under 2 years in, we have stabilised the economy. If you look at the economic figures for earlier this year, growth was up, inflation was down, interest rates were down, and all of this impacts on the lives of people across the country. So actually the hard yards in relation to the economy have been done. Obviously now we need to maintain that in difficult circumstances with a war on two fronts, which is impacting us. But at the same time, what we've also seen is waiting lists coming down, confidence in the NHS is going up. That's a good thing. I'm not suggesting it's all fixed, but I think people can feel it's heading in the right direction. We're putting in place free school meals, free breakfast clubs, lifting the two-child benefit limit so that hundreds of thousands of children we lifted out of poverty, and on top of that, Employment Rights Act, the Renters' Rights Act, which is the biggest upgrade in the rights of people at work and those in rented accommodation for a generation. So there's a lot being going on,
yeah, and you've
which
also
will make a real change to people's lives.
And you've also done more than a dozen U-turns on policies, you know, that you haven't listed there. But you know what I'm referring to. Today, we now know that MPs are going to get a vote on a Privileges Committee investigation into whether you misled Parliament. Now, that's clearly the charge that brought Boris Johnson down. Is it humiliating to be referred to in the same breath as Boris Johnson, a man you disparaged?
Well, it is important there's transparency in relation to the appointment of Peter Mandelson. I completely accept that. And there's a huge process already underway. It's called the humble address process, where literally thousands of documents are being put before Parliament, and we're complying with that in full. So the full picture is there under that process. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which Emily Thornberry chairs, is also calling evidence, and we're fully complying with that. So there's a huge amount of transparency there already. Quite right too. But what my political opponents are doing tomorrow is a political stunt.
Yeah, and it's a stunt that you pulled on the last Prime Minister,
didn't you? It's a political stunt. And the reason they're doing it is that they don't agree with what we're doing as a government.
Yeah,
so
but it's a
when we've
stunt
made
that you
those big
pulled,
changes,
though, Prime Minister, isn't it? On Boris Johnson, you tabled the motion to refer him to the very same committee.
I think the circumstances are completely different, and in addition to the processes I've already set out, I personally was in Parliament last Monday for 2.5 hours answering I don't know how many questions on this, and again at Prime Minister's questions. So there's no lack of transparency here. But it is a political stunt. I think it's unfortunate that they're focusing on that because, you know, we are facing a war on two fronts. I think people are really... They know that what's happening in Iran is going to impact their lives. It's my job to manage and support the country through that. So having a political stunt that adds absolutely nothing to the transparency we've got
and I'll come to Iran.
is not good use of Parliament's time.
I'll come to Iran, but if you're so confident that your conduct is so very different to Boris Johnson, why not just let the Privileges Committee investigate and you know you'll be proven right? Why are you whipping your MPs to vote against this call for an investigation?
Well, because it's a stunt.
And you are whipping your MPs against it.
Well, we've got a meeting of the PLP later on tonight where that's usually determined on a Monday evening. But it is a stunt. We've got huge amounts of transparency going on already. And frankly, as Prime Minister and as a government, it is really important I focus on what matters to millions of people across the country. I know what they're feeling. They're feeling worried about what's happening in the Middle East. They don't like to see the damage that has already been caused. And deep down, I think, in their stomach, they feel this could impact me. My bills might go up, and they're looking to me and the government to say, what are you doing to manage that and make sure that the impact on our country is limited? That's why we're doing all the work on the Strait of Hormuz,
I want to discuss that next. But just to finish on this point, because you've mentioned the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, your former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, is giving evidence there tomorrow. He denies telling civil servants, and I quote, to just approve Mandelson's appointment. Does that sound like the kind of language that he would use? No.
I've known Morgan a very long time, and I'm sure he'll give his evidence tomorrow. I have no doubt about that.
Right, you've never heard him drop the F-bomb?
That isn't Morgan McSweeney. That's not the way he operates.
Right. And when did you last communicate with him?
2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. We had a catch-up. I can't remember precisely.
So you're still friends?
Yes, I've known Morgan for a very long time. We worked together in changing the Labour Party and picking it up after a terrible election victory in 2019.
But,
and we worked together on the general election. No, he resigned, but we have worked together for 8 or 9 years. He is a friend as well as a colleague. And
do you miss him?
Well, I talk to him from time to time, and I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago that we last got together to talk about a number of things.
So you haven't spoken to him about his evidence tomorrow?
No, I haven't.
Well, let's talk about the bigger picture, US-UK relations and Iran, as you've rightly brought up. I mean, you appointed Lord Mandelson to charm Donald Trump, and now obviously the King this week has got to play nice with him. Let's just look at some of the things that Trump has said just in the last 6 weeks alone. He's repeatedly slagged you off. He's dismissed UK aircraft carriers as toys. He's threatened new tariffs. He's questioned Britain's sovereignty over the Falklands Islands. Is it time to stop pretending this man is an ally?
Well, I think it's important, just as you went through that list, to remind ourselves what that's all about. I took a very clear decision at the outbreak of the conflict in Iran that the UK would not be dragged into the conflict.
It was your Love Actually moment, wasn't it?
Well, I'm the British Prime Minister. I act in the British national interest. And it's not in our national interest to get dragged into that war. What has happened since there is a huge amount of pressure has been applied to me to change my mind. But I'm not going to do so because
and you're proud
it's
of that.
not.
You're proud to have that difference with Trump.
I'm the British Prime Minister and I act in the national interest of Britain. And it's really important that I make that absolutely clear. I drew a number of lessons from the Iraq War those many years ago. And we're not going to get dragged into a war which is not in our interest.
And you've described, you've repeatedly said it's not our war. The problem is, as you already mentioned, it is affecting all of us, isn't it? And people are desperately worried about that. So you're chairing this crisis cabinet committee tomorrow. I wondered if you could just level with the British public. You know, are you worried about fuel and food shortages? Is that why you're chairing that committee?
There is going to be an impact on the UK. There already is. And I think it's really important I level with the public that we are doing everything we can to get the Strait of Hormuz open, because obviously that is vital in terms of minimising the impact. But I don't want anybody to think that once the strait is open, that that's the end of the damage. It'll go on longer than that. And that's why we've got almost daily meetings of ministers and officials looking at how we manage the impact. At the moment, we're confident about supply. We have reopened a CO2 plant in the northeast. Airlines are telling us that they've got enough jet fuel at the moment.
But when you say at the moment, for how long?
Well, we monitor this all of the time, and they have told us so far that they've got the supplies that they need.
But summer holidays could be in jeopardy.
Well, that's why we manage it. I think what we'll see how long the conflict goes on. I can see that if there's more impact, people might change their habits, where they go on holiday this year, what they're buying in the supermarket, that sort of thing.
So you are, I mean, really your message to the public is don't panic, but actually there may be some shortages of food and fuel.
Don't panic, but we chose not to get involved in this war. That was the right thing to do, but we must protect the British people from the impact of it. That's why we have these meetings. I'm chairing the one tomorrow. I do that regularly. And that's looking across the piece. What more can we do? How do we manage the risks as we see them? It is important to say that because we got the economy into a better place, we are better placed to deal with this than we otherwise would have been.
And if there are shortages, it's Trump's fault, basically.
Well, look, we didn't go into this war, but I think for most people sitting at home...
yes will suffice.
Well, I think for them, they would say, and I think they're right in this, you're the Prime Minister. The fact you didn't take us into the war is, I think most people say that's the right thing. They don't want to be in the war. That's absolutely right. But they would say, but it is your duty, working with your government, to help manage the risks and manage the situation so that it doesn't impact on me. And that's why we took the decision, for example, to lower energy bills and keep them lower by an average of about £100 until the end of June. So there are measures we've been able to take. But so I think for the public, they don't want to hear me saying... this was not our war. They want to hear me saying, I'm not getting dragged into this war, but I am going to manage the risk so that the impact on you is minimised.
But you talk about trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The fact is, as Trump has repeatedly pointed out, we don't have that much skin in the game because of the size of our defence industry. I mean, if you look at the fact, UK spends nearly 11% of GDP on welfare versus 2.4% on defence. That's way behind the US, Poland, Germany, just to name a few. I mean, you've delayed the defence investment plan. Where's the leadership, the sort of the urgency, the grit on that?
Can I just give an answer in two parts to that, and I will answer both parts. The first is we are leading a coalition. So France and the UK have put together a coalition to do the hard work on getting the Strait of Hormuz open, and we've got over 40 countries to contribute to that. That is important, and that shows what you can do with international leadership. There are three components to that: the political and diplomatic work that we need to do. There's the logistics, because most of the vessels, the insurers, are saying that they need help once the strait is open to get through and to manage the process. And
but we haven't got the ships, have we?
Well, no, let me deal precisely with that. We're also doing military planning, which is to have reassurance measures through a military mission led by the French and by the British, where a number of countries, a dozen already, have said we have got capability that we will put together, we will pool, so that we can have reassurance as ships go through the strait. So actually... there is a lot we can do internationally if we bring countries together. On your second point...
hurrying up the defence investment plan.
Yeah, well, the first thing it is important for me to point out is we've already increased defence spending to 2.6%. That is the biggest...
Tiny compared to the US
Well,
or
that's
Germany.
the biggest uplift since the sustained uplift since the Cold War.
But we could be at war with Russia, within a year.
We do need to go further. I've made commitments to NATO about going further. We're finalising the defence investment plan, which is actually a future-look plan as well. It's not just about how much you spend. It's strategically what do we need as a country. So we're finalising that. But, I'm not going to hide away from this. We are going to have to spend more. We've made that commitment to NATO, and the DIP is a step on that journey.
The investment plan. Well, let's talk about domestic issues, because you've got these big elections next week. Labour is facing annihilation. Do you take personal responsibility for potentially thousands of councillors, Labour councillors, losing their seats?
Well, firstly, let me say what fantastic candidates we've got, many of whom are councillors at the moment. And there's very much I'm proud of in this government in what we've already delivered. But whether it's the day before the election or the day after the election, we'll obviously have to assess the results when we see them.
But if it's catastrophic, will you take personal responsibility?
Of course I take responsibility for everything this government does, but whether it's the day before or the day after the election, people will be looking to me to make sure I'm getting on with the job and delivering for the country. And at a time
and does
like
that mean
this,
changing direction? For example, should your Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, worry that after a catastrophic election defeat next week, you might turn around to her and say, look, I can't be doing these immigration reforms, we can't be doing that because that's unpopular with the left of the party and I need to cosy up to them?
I think at a moment like this, it's important for me to take this to a different level in the sense we're going to have impact from the Middle East conflict and the ongoing war in Ukraine, which is going to impact this government and possibly all of us for a generation. It is really important how we respond. My analysis over the last 20 years is that every time we've gone through some sort of global shock, all governments have aspired to get back to the status quo as quickly as possible. But the status quo didn't work, and therefore we cannot do that.
So you will shift, you will shift, and that means shifting to the left of your party, which is...
It's not a question of to the left, to the right. I'm not talking about political continuum. I'm talking about recognising that when you have a global crisis like this, you can't aspire to get back to the status quo.
Okay.
On the economy, for example, we have to be much more secure and resilient. That does mean being closer to Europe.
Yeah.
Let me be really clear about that.
Okay.
On energy,
potentially rejoining at the next election, could that be
rejoining
the EU?
We've already got closer. We've got another summit this year where we want to go closer to. That is in our interest. It's the right thing to do. On energy, we need energy independence. We're all the time on an international market, a fossil fuel market. Global events are impacting everybody watching this programme. I want to take back control of their bills by having energy independence. So we need to seize that. And then on defence, yes, there's the question of spend, but there's also how do we integrate better with Europe? How do we share capabilities? How do we work with coalitions like the two coalitions that the French and the British are leading, the Strait of Hormuz and, of course, the response in Ukraine? They're the big issues in terms of what will define our country for a very long time to come. And so whether it's the day before or day after the election, it is really important that I focus intensely on what will shape our country for the future because of the global situation we're in.
Let me just finish with a few questions on you personally, what it's like to be under the amount of pressure you're under. Because, you look back to, you were a distinguished lawyer, you sort of basked in the respect of your friends, and then fast forward to the 2 years you spent as Prime Minister. In that time, you have dispensed with 2 cabinet secretaries, 2 chiefs of staff, 4 communications directors, 6 permanent secretaries. You're losing support in the cabinet. I mean, does it feel lonely here in Number 10?
Well, first let me say, it is an incredible privilege to be Prime Minister. And I feel that every day. And we should never lose sight of that. It is an incredible privilege to head up the government of the United Kingdom. And I feel that privilege every day.
Do you feel the loneliness, though, here in Number 10?
Look, I mean, I've got a very good and strong cabinet. We talk regularly, not just in the cabinet meetings, but also on a daily basis.
They're cooling towards you, though, aren't they?
We work very well together as a cabinet. I've spoken to very many of them in recent weeks. They're all rising, actually, to the challenge of our time, which is how do we deal with the impact of what's going on in the Middle East? But
is it a lonely job, being Prime Minister?
Look, I think leadership is always a situation where you have to manage a team, you have to set direction, you have to be clear what the purpose of the government is.
And that's
why
lonely.
That's why, actually, at the last 2 or 3 cabinet meetings, the thing we've concentrated on very much is how do we rise to this moment because of what's going on in the Middle East?
Yeah.
That is something that all cabinet members are committed to, and it's a collective discussion.
When you look at all those people who've gone from your government and from the civil service, do you ever look at yourself, 3 in the morning, wake up and think, are you the problem?
Well, I think it's important to put this in perspective. There are hundreds of thousands of civil servants, many, many politicians, all doing extremely good jobs in positions of leadership. So, yes, changes have been made along the way, but the number in the team The strength of what we got is really good, and I enjoy working with them every day.
You know, at the general election, you said you'd always put country before party.
Yes.
If you became convinced that you were holding the country back, that you were the problem, would you quit?
I made a series of promises at the general election, and then we won the general election with a landslide victory. And therefore I got a mandate to make the changes that I think are desperately needed in this country, making sure living standards go up, making sure our public services are restored, our health service, but also the other public services, making sure every single child can go as far as their talent ability will take them, making sure people feel safe and secure
So if
in their community and their country.
If you're not doing what you set out to
that
do.
was a mandate for 5 years. It's a promise I made to the electorate that that's what we would do.
Right, so you'll keep going for the full 5 years?
I will do that, and I will be judged at the next election on the promises that I made, and I intend to deliver on them.
And if your wife, Vic, turns to you and says, you know, enough's enough, this pressure is intolerable, would you listen to her?
I always listen to Vic. I think she was the one in the first place that basically said, why on earth would you want to go into politics? But she is an absolute...
And your answer to that question now?
She is an absolute rock, and I confide in her all of the time, and hers is the best advice. I'm just thankful that I've got her every day.
And at the moment she's advising you to keep going.
She is, yes, and we talk everything through, and it's fantastic. We've got also two fantastic kids, a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. I can't tell you how much joy and happiness they bring. They are my pride and joy every single day, and that gives us. And we are in the flat just upstairs. It's our flat. There's no work meetings in there. When you go through the door, I stop being the Prime Minister, and I pick up being Dad.
It's a sanctuary.
It's a sanctuary, and my children feel that their role in life is to laugh at me in almost everything I do. It is great.
Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I've just finished interviewing the Prime Minister. Absolutely fascinating. Clearly, we talked all about the Mandelson vetting saga. That was pretty interesting in itself. And Iran and US-UK relations. The most interesting bit of that interview was when we talked about his own personal leadership failings, as his opponents see it, and the advice that he takes from his family and the solace he draws from his family. And it sounds as if anyone's going to root him out of here, as some of his opponents want, it will be his wife, Vic, who he listens to. Well, Baroness Helena Kennedy and Penny Mordaunt are on the sofa tonight, and they're joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, let me ask you first for your sort of snap analysis of that interview.
Well, in many ways, you got the Prime Minister, as you don't really see him very often, as I haven't really seen him before. You got two Prime Ministers, in effect. For a lot of that interview, when you were asking him about policy and politics, it was furrowed brow, it was kind of battle mode. He was sort of giving, a lot of it was quite defensive answers. And then he opened up at the end, as you just mentioned, when you brought up the subject of his wife. And I do think that that's very significant, because a lot of the problems that Keir Starmer has flows from the fact that there aren't really many people who are sort of long marchers at his side. You read the list of people who he'd thrown under the bus.
Well, let me turn to you, Helena, because you are a friend of the Prime Minister's, so you have marched by his side. What did you think? What was your reaction?
It's very interesting. I mean, you see, I'm a friend. I'm a colleague. I was in chambers with Keir, and he is as a young graduate lawyer, came into our chambers, and at times he worked with me on cases. But I'm of a different generation. But we was always highly admired, greatly liked. We all fought over having him as our junior on cases, because he worked like a demon and he could cut through it all in the most incredible way. I mean, he's technically absolutely fantastic. As a lawyer, he's very, very clever.
But now as Prime Minister,
it's interesting. Watching him as Prime Minister, I don't think that he is somebody who's absolutely driven by the sort of fabric of politics. I think that he really is wanting to deliver in a way that he sought to deliver when he was the Director of Public Prosecutions.
But he's not, is he? I mean,
it's an interesting thing about him, is that I think that he's not political in the way that most politicians are, who've basically been there ever since they came out of university and start off as researchers and then become spads and then they become different things inside politics. And so they know all of that. He's not wily. He's not listening to the gossip. He's not interested in any of that.
And Penny, did you think he seemed...
I thought
he brought to life when he was talking about his family. He sort of glowed, didn't he? And then when he was talking about politics, he looked sort of slightly miserable.
Look, I think this is the J word. It's judgment, and that's what people are questioning. They're questioning his judgment. And listening to that, I think he's about to make a serious error of judgment, because, I mean, the Privileges Committee exists to defend the rights of members of Parliament, the right not to be lied to, misled, abused. And as a consequence, it defends the rights of the electors that their representatives are not treated in such fashion. And a couple of things in there, the notion that he might whip the vote, but also
which has been
that
confirmed now,
he's
Labour
not...
MPs are being whipped.
He's going to fight. Being sent to it. This is a really serious mistake. If he doesn't have he's done nothing wrong, the Privileges Committee route is the best way he can get back on the front foot.
Which is the point I put to him, but he wasn't having any of it.
No, and I think that is a serious problem. I'll just remind you of the Boris Johnson incident.
You got PTSD
We
from
should
that.
remember, even though in their final report there were people, the House divided on it, there were mixed views about the report itself, but the House unanimously referred the then Prime Minister to that committee. And I think he has treated, he's treated the Speaker badly, I think, previously. I think there is a contempt of the House of Commons that is a rot which is going to set in, and it will. That's what we'll do for him.
We've got a lot more to
Penny's
discuss.
very keen to get a seat to get back into Parliament,
Yeah,
so she's
hang
got
on.
to be loyal.
Hold that thought there, because we were going to have much more to discuss in just a second. We've got a bit of breaking news, though. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
Well, the King and Queen are set to arrive in the US very shortly as their state visit gets underway. And it is a trip which will be crucial in resetting the special relationship after a few weeks which have seen Donald Trump ridicule the Prime Minister and the UK's military power. Our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, is at Joint Base Andrews for us. Laura, tell us what's going on.
Well, literally as I speak, the King's plane is touching down on the runway here. So the King and Queen have now arrived in Washington, this huge military base just outside the city. You can imagine security here is incredibly tight, and security has been a really big word over the last few days. We know that the security teams, both here in the US and in Britain, have been in close contact, working round the clock following that shooting at the dinner the President was at on Saturday night, making sure that every engagement the King is at is as safe as possible. Safety is key. They've assessed, they've reviewed everything, and the decision has been that, yes, of course, this state visit will go ahead as planned. It was already riddled with risk in many ways, diplomatic risk, security risks as well. That was being amplified. So I think what we'll see is a lot more security involved in this trip. The King knows America very well as Prince of Wales. He came here 19 times. This is, of course, his first visit as King, as monarch, and, of course, being hosted by a president who, on the one hand, loves the British monarchy, but on the other hand, is known to speak out at times as well. So will he stick to the script? Will Trump stick to the script? That is the big question at the moment.
Laura, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll keep you updated as that story progresses. Now, as you watch the political pantomime play out on a daily basis, it might be tempting to think that satire simply cannot compete with the reality of the events in Westminster, Washington and beyond. And you don't have to take my word for it. Here's what politicians themselves think.
Armando Iannucci and the thick of it cast couldn't script something as cynical, as empty and as damaging as this government's behaviour in so many spheres.
Even the writers of the thick of it would have dismissed such a plotline as far too implausible.
The writers of In the Thick of It might use this for a future episode.
Unlike the thick of it's Peter Mannion, under this modern Conservative Party, there's no fear he will be represented by a fibre optic Fagin at the dispatch box.
It was like a question and answer session for me from a programme like The Thick of It.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we really are in the thick of it.
Well, the king of satire, Armando Iannucci, creator of The Thick of It, is here on the sofa.
Hello, I don't know what to feel about all that.
Well, we've rolled out the red carpet for you. when you see people quoting the thick of it time and time again, you think now we're at this febrile moment in British politics. Do you find that Westminster life is very much imitating your art?
Oh, I would do it. Did really. I find we're in a time now where you see every episode of The Thick of It was about the minister thinking they might have done something wrong and no one must know or find out about it. And then Malcolm Tucker comes in and makes things 10 times worse and then blames everyone else. But now people just say they haven't done anything wrong and just try and front it out, really. Or they say, like Donald Trump's famously, before he got elected, say I could shoot someone in the face and still get elected. There's a sort of disdain for the kind of principles of law, really.
And so when you've got larger-than-life characters like Donald Trump, Nigel Farage on the scene, does that kind of kill satire for you?
Oh, gosh, no. I've always described them as, they're showmen, they're entertainers, so they're their own kind of, I've called them self-basting satirists in that, you just leave it to them to say the things they say and, and somehow the comedy really comes from applying fact-finding in journalism to what they're saying, analysing what they're saying to see whether it stacks up. If they said this then, why are they saying this now? Or why, in the case of Donald Trump, why is he saying two completely different things simultaneously in every sentence? Analysing that, really.
But do you... I don't know whether you saw any of our interview with the Prime Minister.
Yes.
What do you make of that, both as a human being and as a comedian?
Well, you mentioned it. He lit up and came alive when he talked about his family, which he described as when he's not Prime Minister. He goes upstairs to that and he's not Prime Minister, and that's where he lights up. And that says a lot. I do a show on Radio 4 called Strong Message Here, which looks at quotes and language of politics. And a phrase that stuck in my mind is from an anonymous Treasury source who said that they worked with many, many Prime Ministers over the years. And Keir Starmer was the first Prime Minister whose political beliefs were a private matter. And that's the problem, isn't it? We don't quite know. When he went on the steps of Number 10, he said, unburdened by dogma. That sounded like a good thing, but it was also a mark of how actually, as we're finding out, there isn't that guiding set of very clear principles that now have to be delivered, I think, with some vigour and vim and emotion. At the time of the thick of it, I was obsessing with governments, obsessing too much about the media. But now I think, to succeed as a political leader, you don't have to manipulate the media, but you do have to have some kind of resonance and some kind of personality that conveys with passion what it is you believe.
Well, I just want to see if we can play a few clips from the thick of it,
okay,
which might resonate today.
Okay.
Let me have a look.
This is like a clown running across a minefield. You're a f***ing omni-shambles, that's what you are. You're like that coffee machine, from bean to cup, you f*** up.
Well, to start with, he wouldn't have a job in Westminster.
Yes. But a lot of it is quite... When you look at, Sir Ollie Robbins sacked for failing to brief Keir Starmer on a vetting file he never even read. That was peak thick.
Yes, I tried watching it. I don't know who did what wrong or whether they knew what they did was wrong or whether... Everybody seems to have done their bit of the process correctly and everyone else seems to have misunderstood the process.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting. So each person thinks it's fine, but everyone else has misunderstood. And you start putting it together and it's kind of systematic of how government doesn't function now in that, we don't have a constitution, so everything is done by kind of precedents and nods and winks and assumptions that everything will be fine. But we don't actually carry now the knowledge of how these things work. And various things like this process has been allowed to ossify so that no one quite knows who ultimately takes the decision on what. It's not just a Labour problem, it's something that's happened in government the last 15, 20 years, I think.
And when you think, Keir Starmer in our interview, he kept on trying to talk about Iran and, that's really important stuff,
yes,
and the cost of living crisis.
Yes.
Do you have any sympathy? Because, you're a patron of Child Poverty Action Group.
Yes.
Do you have any sympathy with him that there are more important things going on in the world at the moment than who said what when on the Mandelson saga?
Oh, absolutely. On that point, he mentioned lifting the two-child benefit cap, which... we've long argued, Child Poverty Action Group and lots of child poverty campaigns have argued, is surest way to lift children out of poverty. It'll lift 350,000 children out of poverty. But you then have to explain why that is the case and why it's a good thing to do. Because if you don't, if you just say, it's just great, isn't it, we're good, and you don't explain how actually there's a really strong economic argument behind it as well, and it takes pressure off those social services, education, health, all those things that actually impact on local government, and local government does have the resources to do. Once you take the pressure off that, it puts people back into the economy. That's the economic argument. But if you don't do that, then you leave a vacuum. And in that vacuum, other parties are coming in and saying, this is money for scroungers, they're just trying to get more children to get more money, which isn't the case.
Nigel Farage is better at selling his product to the public than Keir Starmer is.
Well, anyone coming from opposition or a new party always has an easier... they don't know... They don't know too much, as in they haven't been in power. So they feel free to make their promises as optimistic and as uplifting sounding as possible. Unfortunately, Keir Starmer has the air of someone who knows way too much, can't bring himself even to pretend that things are, on his face, that things can be happier rather than project something, an image of someone who's just seen the figures and can't pretend they're as dire as they are.
When you look at, those clips that we played in the lead-in about how often people quote the thick of it, and, there's this note that did the rounds in the Cabinet Office a while ago, I'm sure you've seen it, that says the only difference between Westminster and the thick of it is that in the thick of it, people don't go around saying this is just like something out of the thick of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
the thick of it was meant to be a warning. It wasn't meant to be an instruction manual. That's the thing. So I think I stopped making it when it was clear.
Well, I was going to ask, could you do a remake? Because the last series was, 2012, wasn't it?
Yes, 2012. I think the people who are being good and effective now are, as I say, comedians who are also like journalists, John Oliver and Jon Stewart in America, who have just teams of researchers and resources behind it to then actually apply an analytical forensic argument to what it is that's happening.
Were you ever surprised about the kind of longevity of the thick of it and just how many people do still, it keeps coming around and coming up?
It does, but then I started to think of it on the basis of being a huge fan of Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister. And those stories keep coming around as well. It's,
Yeah, they really do. I looked the other day. I mean, it honestly was just like a commentary on what was going on with Sir Ollie Robbins at the committee. I was thinking all these quotes from
yeah. And just today, I mean, you occasionally pick up on absurdities. The footage of the attempted shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the guy in the image that's always showing Donald Trump some cards. Yeah. He was doing fortune telling. Yeah. And he didn't even... not in his wildest dreams did he think that what was about to happen.
Is there a sort of chilling effect with, Trump sort of issues legal threats? He's suing the BBC.
Yes, I mean, that's
does that worry you?
Yes, it does. Politicians are becoming thinner-skinned in that... they will... I mean, if you see what happens when Nigel Farage is asked a follow-up question on anything, it gets quite flouncy. And in America, they've just resorted to this, I'm not even going to answer the question, I'm going to sue you for asking the question. And they do it because they have money and they know that they can wear you down. And that's my biggest concern, is that the media is now more or less under control of the oligarchs, the infogarchs in America, who have billions at the resources and could buy you up.
Do you worry about AI? Because I know a lot of comic writers are really worried about that.
Yeah, I worry that, it's a tool. It's not a solution, it's a tool. We provide the solution. And if we just assume that, as Keir Starmer once said, if we mainline it, if we inject it into our bloodstream. Yeah. It's not the sudden answer to everything. Yeah. It has to be monitored, it has to be regulated, it has to be watched, and it has to have a human element in charge of it. Yeah. If we just assume it'll do everything, but if you ask AI something that you know and you see the answer it gives, you realise how inaccurate it is. So we can't be putting that as it is now.
Yeah, although it is improving all the time.
Responsibility.
You said you were glued to Ollie Robbins last week. Will you be watching Morgan McSweeney?
I wouldn't say I was glued.
Well, kind of semi-detached then.
I sat in front of.
Well, will you be glued to Morgan McSweeney tomorrow?
I will, possibly. Yes, it's tomorrow morning, isn't it? Yes. Yes, I'm doing my podcast tomorrow afternoon. That's perfect.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's great to have you in the studio on the first night of our show. Armando Iannucci, I will continue to dredge up the old clips from the thick of it, 'cause I love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's go back to the US now, where our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, joins me now, and the King and Queen are about to land. Alistair.
The King and Queen are now waiting on the plane at Joint Base Andrews, and the Honour Guard is preparing to take its position, as are those who will receive him. It'll take a little bit of time before the King and Queen are ready. It is a plane that has landed early, and as the whole programme is timed to the second, I expect it'll be a little bit of time before we see the King and Queen appearing at the start of this state visit to mark the 250th anniversary of the United States of America.
Alistair, thank you very much for that update, and we'll bring you more as and when we get it. Let's go to Helena and Penny. Well, Penny, you, of course, famously carried the sword at the King's coronation. So tell me what your thought is about him arriving in America, how he's going to handle Donald Trump.
He'll handle it brilliantly, and we're very lucky to have him. He is an incredible diplomat, and I think he will stand up for this country, and he will remind the president and those around him of what is very special about the relationship between our two nations. So
he's doing the job that, you know, Keir Starmer wanted Mandelson to do. He's charming. He's charming. He'll be charming the president.
I think he will be charming, but I also think the reason why he has cut through an impact, as his late mother did, is because they're people of substance.
Helena, I mean, we know what the King thinks on climate change, for example, and we know what Trump thinks on climate change. There's going to be some awkward moments behind the scenes, aren't there?
Well, the King has a great ability to talk about quite controversial things, but in a way that is quite emollient. And I think that he would gear it towards the environment and that way into the whole issue of climate, because he's been a great environmentalist. And I'm sure that he will find a way of getting consensus with Donald Trump, even on subjects that are difficult.
But because he's such a great diplomat.
Well, he is. And I mean, you've got to remember, he's been doing this since he was a very young man. I mean, we're talking about 60 years experience of doing this since he was very young. So I have no doubt that having this visit was a good thing. It's a big historic moment to be celebrated, and I'm one of the people who thinks, yes, it's right that he goes.
Even though he's been given Trump has been given a royal seal of approval, despite the fact he's been so sort of horrendous to.
This is people to people stuff, and it's reaching beyond Trump. Someday Trump will be gone, and the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned. But I think that this is about the permanence of relationships, and I think the King will do it well. And I'm not worried about Trump saying something mad and so on. The King will be able to deal with it, whatever madness he comes out with.
This is also, I think, really important for the general public as well, because presidents and prime ministers come and go, but you want the American people to understand that the relationship between our nations is special too. So I think this is on many levels. It's not just about the politicians.
Yeah, and listen, we were earlier talking about the business of the prime minister receiving these brickbats from Donald Trump. The general public in Britain, unlike what was said by Kemi Badenoch and by Farage, putting the thumbs up to invading Iran,
that's
what they did. They were all in favour of doing it until they saw that it wasn't quite a good idea and was going to have economics.
Penny, come back on that.
No, she was talking about, and very sensibly, taking out the things firing drones, not just the drones themselves. But look, there is a disconnect, I think, about what we tend to be talking about on the sofa and what America is actually doing. Iran is about China. And what is going to
go
happen?
Off onto that whole thing.
Well,
the point I was making was about our Prime Minister. We're on here talking about our Prime Minister and our relationships.
Policies.
The Prime Minister made a good call, and
there's no issue about that.
The British public like the
common understanding about what is happening is not. That is so far adrift. That is very worrying.
Well, and what about that point that the Prime Minister made a good call in Helena's book, and the opposition leader was quite gung-ho about Iran initially and then backtracked, didn't she?
She was talking about us being under attack, our sovereign base and our allies in the region.
No.
And
she was a bit more generally supportive of the war than that.
No, she was. Well, I think we should be more understanding about what America is actually trying to do here, and that's the worrying.
Because nobody else knows.
Well, actually, it is quite obvious when you look at their foreign policy and you look at what they've done in Venezuela and elsewhere.
Penny,
this is about China and oil.
The leadership because you want a new seat.
Well,
so let's be clear.
That's
not the case. Really, the Prime Minister made the right call, and the British public agree with it.
I'm clearly onto something because I've got you rattled. But this is a serious point.
It's a
The President of the United States is about to visit China. And this is all about maintaining pressure for that visit. There is something much bigger going on here. And what I hope, although you don't see our politicians talking about it, that there is an understanding of that, because it is critical that our Parliament actually understands what's going on.
Helena, we changed Prime Ministers just now in the middle of a thing where he has taken a position which the general public like. We don't want to go down the route that we went down in relation to Iraq all those years ago, and the consequences we're still living with.
Of course
Hold on a minute. And our Prime Minister has been developing incredibly good relationships with European leaders, particularly around the issue of Ukraine and the whole business threat from Russia. And he has
hang on a second. Pause right there. Pause right there, because we've been keeping an eye on those pictures of the King and Queen arriving in the US. Let's go back to our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, because there they are. Alistair.
For the King and Queen, starting this state visit to mark the 250th anniversary of the United States, a welcome and a salute. And at the bottom of the stairs, Ambassador Monica Crowley, who is the Chief Protocol Officer and the Assistant Secretary of State. And being received by the United Kingdom Ambassador also, Sir Christian Turner, recently in office. And his wife. And in every respect, the Ambassador of the United Kingdom, working closely with Ambassador Monica Crowley, have put together this visit. And the Queen is receiving a posy of flowers from one of the children of a member of the British Embassy staff. And also another from Sam, who's 8 years old, and the child of one of the commanders of the Royal Navy working at the embassy too. Chance for the staff who have been responsible for Joint Base Andrews. Andrews is the name taken from the Lieutenant General who was killed in the Second World War, who was one of the founders of the United States Air Force. And the Defence Attaché of the United Kingdom, the Air Vice Marshal, welcoming his king. James Roscoe, who is the Deputy Head of Mission and was temporarily acting as ambassador. He used to work in the royal household. He was part of the press office for Elizabeth II, and other members of the British Embassy staff welcoming the King and Queen. And through the honour cordon made up of the United States Army, the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard and the United States Air Force, the King and Queen are escorted by Ambassador Crowley to the cars that will convey them directly to the President and First Lady at the White House. It's quite a long journey, but it will be time for the King and Queen to recover from their flight And you can see the presence of security even here in Joint Base Andrews, very high for the King. We hear the national anthems of the United Kingdom and the United States. It was the King's 5 great-grandfather, King George III, who was informed that the 13 colonies in America had declared independence in 1776. A relationship since then that has been fraught from time to time, but which has seen monarchs of each generation play their part. And it was the King's great-grandfather, George VI, that came to the United States, the first monarch to visit in 1939, at a time of great peril for those who were to ally ultimately and defeat Nazi Germany. Today, the King is in his own challenging role as head of state, and to meet the head of state of the United States at a time when the United Kingdom faces its disagreements. But undoubtedly, the King and Queen have a relationship with the President and the First Lady, and it will be precisely when everyone is prepared for the journey that will pass through the roads to the White House, and it's in its own way very well planned, and the security very cautious, as the United States Air Force Band of Joint Base Andrews has played those 2 national anthems, and the United States Marine holding the Union flag as that infanteer holds the United States Stars and Stripes. And whatever the next few days begins, this is a traditional head of state visiting another head of state, one of the highest profile of recent years, as the King carries the responsibility of representing His Majesty's government and its policy here in the United States. And following the King and with the King are a number of people from the government and supportive elements of the diplomatic efforts of the United Kingdom to deal with all the issues that sit between the United States and the United Kingdom at this time. With the security guards now moved to the other cars, the procession moves off, and for the King, the start of this state visit, principally to mark the extraordinary relationship that has led to war between the 2 nations and the fighting of wars by the 2 nations. For the King, it starts now, and he has 4 days, 3 in Washington, then up to New York, and then he will return via Bermuda to the United Kingdom. But his duty to represent the United Kingdom, to continue the work done on a number of visits by his mother, Elizabeth II, who was here for the 200th anniversary of that Declaration of Independence in 1976.
Alistair, thank you very much. There you have it, the arrival. Very elegant, Penny, wasn't it? There is controversy around the visit with the Epstein survivors wanting to meet the King and Queen, being denied that opportunity. Is that the right decision, do you think, very quickly?
Well, I was listening to what they had to say, and I would say to them that everything that they would ask of the King and that he could do, they already have from him.
What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, listen, my heart goes out to those people who've suffered so much. But at the same time, you know, it really is important that we have due process. And there's an investigation going on here just now. And the idea that a slip of the tongue or something said could have consequences to those investigations would not be in the interests of the victims either. So I think it is the right decision. And I think that in the fullness of time, we'll have a better sense. I mean, what I think is appalling is that there's been no proper pursuit of some of the men who were users of those girls and abusers of them in America. The State Department, the Justice Department, hasn't really done anything on that front.
Well, great to have your thoughts. It's brilliant to be chatting in this first show on the pink sofa. More coverage, of course, of that historic visit on the UK tonight with Sarah Jane, who is here now. SJ, I'm passing the baton to you for the very first time.
I'll tell you what, Cathy, it's a good job that sofa looks nice and comfortable. You'll need to lie down after that. Welcoming the King and the Queen to America and welcoming Cathy Newman to Sky. That's how it works, Cathy. It's the Sky News juggle. Big interviews with the Prime Minister, followed by live breaking events. You're definitely going to need a live down. Fantastic first show, Cathy. Well done.
It's whizzed by. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Over to you, SJ.
All right, thanks, Cathy. We'll see you tomorrow night.